Academy Podcast, One Student, One Creativity.
The bucket is empty. A child holds it with his small hand. He walks slowly on the dry ground. He walks far, not to play, not to meet his friends, not to go to school, but to look for water. At home, his mother waits. She sits quietly near the door. Her lips are dry. Her eyes look at the sky again and again. She hopes for rain. But the sky above them is silent. No rain, no promise, only heat and dry wind. Friends, this scene may sound like a movie, but it is not from Hollywood. This is something that really happens in many places for today. People still walk far from water, and villages still suffer from a long drought. Villages still suffer, and many people say it is one of the results of the climate change. But interestingly, this story is not new. Many years ago, Indonesian writer told a similar story. His name is Navis, and he wrote a novel called Kemarau. And today, students is not only learning in novels, but they also watching it in new form. Words become imagined, description becomes seen, and emotion becomes something we can see and hear. Hello everyone, welcome back to Eddie Podcast, One Student, One Creativity from the Literature in ELC course. My name is Nadine Ramadhani, and I will be your host for today's episode. In this podcast, we will talk about how literature can explore in creative and meaningful ways in a classroom. In the previous episode, we talked about illustrating Drought from the novel Kemarau, but today we will discuss something different. Today's topic is bringing Drought to life when the novel Kemarau film about climate change. We will talk about how the story becomes the movie on the screen. And to discuss in this topic, I am joined by our guest. Her name is Qorina and Sholeha. Hello Qorina.
Hello. Thank you so much for inviting me today. I'm so happy to be here.
We are happy to have you here too. Today we will discuss our project about novel Kemarau and its film adaptation.
Yes, this topic is very interesting for us because when we read the novel, we imagine the words with our mind. But when we watch the film, we see the story with our own eyes directly. We see the dry land, we can hear the wind, and we can also feel the emotions of the characters. We are no longer become readers, but we are witnesses.
That is very true. Sometimes film can make the problem feel more stronger, especially when we talk about drought and climate change, because the image and the sound make the story more stronger, and that is what we'll explore for today's episode. And how the story of Drought and Kemarau become more powerful when it's shown through the film. So, Qorina, let's talk about something interesting. When the students read the novel Kemarau, they usually imagine the story in their minds. But in this project, students watch the film adaptation and also analyze how the story was shown on the screen. In your opinion, what changed when the story moves from the novel to film?
I think the biggest problem, the biggest change is the perspective. Because when students read the novel, they understand the story with their mind. They read the words, they imagine the village, they imagine the drought. But when the story becomes a film, everything becomes more clear. Students can see the dry land, students can hear the wind, and also students can feel the emotions of the characters.
That's true. Sometimes when we read novel, the story feels a little far from us. But when we watch the movie, the story suddenly feels very close.
Yes, exactly. For example, in one scene, we see a farmer standing in the middle of a dry land. The land is cracked. There is no water. There are no green plants. The farmer just stands there and looks at the land. He also looks tired and a little hopeless. Many students say that this scene helps them understand the story better. Because in the novel, the drought is described with words, but in the film, the drought becomes visual. We can really see how hard it is to live in the village without water.
So, the film helps students connect more deeply with the story.
Yes, and not only with the story, but also with the human experience. When the students watch the film, they begin to think about the story, about the people in the story. They imagine how it feels to be there, how it feels to live without water. They also imagine how difficult it is to wait for rain that never comes.
That's very powerful. So in this way, literature is not only something we read in class. It becomes something we feel and reflect on. And that is why combining literature and film can be very meaningful in learning. Students cannot only analyze the story, but they also learning about life, people, and reality. Now let's move to another important part. It is also about climate change. So Qorina, how does the film help students understand the climate change?
I think the film helps students understand that climate change is more emotional in one way. When students hear the word climate change, they often think about science. They think about data, they think about numbers, they think about global problems. But the film shows something different. It shows the human side of climate change.
What do you mean by the human side?
The film shows how climate change problems affect real people. For example, students see the cracked land. They see the empty river. They see the tired faces of villagers who are waiting for rain. Sometimes the film is very quiet. There is no music. There is no dialogue, only silence. And that silence shows how much difficult the situation is.
So the film does not only tell the story, but it also lets us to feel the situation.
Yes, that's right. Students begin to realize that climate change is not only about statistics, it is also about people suffering. Film makes them see, not only with their eyes, but also with their heart.
This change the way students think about climate change.
Yes, for students, it did. Some students say that before this project, climate change felt very far away for them. It felt like a global problem that appears somewhere else. But after watching the film and discussing the story of Kemarau, they felt something different. They felt that this problem could also affect them and people who are closer to them. One student even said something very interesting. She said, "Before this, I thought climate change was far away, but now I feel it is closer to us than we think."
That is a very powerful relationship, and maybe that is one of the most important things literature and film can do. They help us to see the world in a new way. Now let's talk about another interesting part. In the literature of ELT in class, the goal is not only to understand literature, students also need to improve their English skills. So Qorina, how does this film activity help students learn English?
This activity actually helps students practice all 4 skills of language in a natural way. First is writing. Before a film can be made, students need to read a script. They must think about the story, the scene, and also the dialogue. Sometimes they also change part of the story from the novel Kemarau so that the story can work well in the film. Second is reading. Students need to read the novel carefully. They need to understand the characters, the setting, and also the message of the story. The third is speaking. Speaking happens when students act in the film. They practice their pronunciation, they say the dialogue many times. Sometimes they repeat the same line over and over again until it sounds natural. And the last skill is listening. During the training process, Students listen to each other. They listen to the dialogue, they listen to the feedback from their friends. Sometimes they record a scene, then watch it again, and then they improve it. So they listen, revise, and improve.
So in one project, students practice reading, writing, speaking, and listening. And this project also helps students develop their 21st century skills, right?
Yes, that's right. For example, students use creativity when they turn a novel into a film. They also use communication when they discuss ideas with their team. They also use collaboration because filmmaking is teamwork. And the last, they use critical thinking when they decide how to show the message of the story. And there is actually one more thing that is also very important. It is empathy. When students see the story of Drought and the struggles of the characters, they begin to understand the feelings of other people. They begin to care.
That's really beautiful. It shows that learning language can help also students to become more aware. Before we finish the episode, I want to ask you the last question. During this project, what was the most powerful moment you saw in students' lives?
There is one thing that I can still remember. At the end of the story, one film of the student, a child stands in the middle of an empty field. The land is dry. The sky is clear. The child looks up at the sky. He is waiting for rain. But the rain never comes. Then the camera slowly moves upward to the sky. Then the screen becomes black. And one sentence appears on the screen. If we do not change, this will be our future.
That is a very strong message. It's simple, but it makes people think.
Yes, because at that moment, the film is not only telling a story, but it also giving a warning.
Friends, sometimes we only really understand something when we can see it in front of us. The novel Kemarau is not only a story from the past, but it's also the mirror of our future. And when students bring this story to life through films, they are not only learning English, they also learning something more deeper. They are learning to care about the world, they are learning to understand the struggle of others, and they are learning that literature can help us see reality more clearly. Thank you so much, Qorina, for sharing your thought and reflection for today.
Thank you, Nadine. I really enjoyed our discussion. Because after this, I hope that the conversation helps listeners see that literature and film can help students understand the important issues like climate change.
Thank you for being with us today, and thank you for everyone for listening. My name is Mirza Ramadhani. I'm your host for today's episode. This is Eddie Academy Podcast, One Student, One Creativity from Literature in the LP course. See you in the final episode.